A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and I'm very glad you're joining us again today. Today we're going to deal with a very interesting subject, which is the use of astrology for financial forecasting. And we'll also come to understand something of the nature of cycles in general as they show up through the precession of the equinoxes, and how that is largely articulated through the mythical, iconic symbols in astrology, that is the zodiac itself, the 12 months, the 12 symbols of those months, the 12 characters in many ways, mythological symbols, etc., and how these tell a story, and they've been telling a story throughout civilization, actually, from the most ancient of times, and it's shown up in mythology, in architecture, and different civilizational expressions, including astrology, and including ancient scripture from all over the world, in fact. It's a very interesting story in itself. Well, we have with us as today's guest Norm Winski, who has been looking at these subjects for a long time and whose specialty is financial forecasting, through which he has made himself a quite handsome fortune. So we know that it works. From firsthand experience, he'll be sharing with us some of his insights and some of the way he operates, some of the way that financial forecasting can be used for understanding the mechanisms and the influences at different times of the year, literally even different months and days of a week, as they will either be influencing markets in such a way that it would be better to buy oats or barley or to sell them. It gets very granular, if you will, and that, by the way, includes the sale of sugar. So we're in for a good time here. A few more words about Norm. He, among his many talents, is, as I said, from the field of financial forecasting and markets. He's worked in forecasting options, commodities, and different types of trading. Norm Winski has been a member of major exchanges, for some 12 years. And in the August 1991 issue of Technical Analysis of Stocks and Commodities magazine, he was named a, quote, certified technical genius, end quote. So it's very interesting for us to have him on. He is the publisher also of the Astro-Trend Newsletter since 1978. He has been on this trail in the cycle, you could say, for many decades, really. His work has also included his own study and research into the work of W.D. Gann, the Elliott Wave theory, astrophysics, astrology, of course, music, which is a form of mathematics, of course, but much more beautiful to hear, the Fibonacci cycle and series, and other aspects of harmonic analysis. We won't be getting that technical today, but we'll certainly give you some understanding of the relationship between forecasting, astrology, and markets. So it's with great pleasure that I have invited Norm Winski to A Better World Radio. Norm, welcome to the show. Good to have you on.
Thank you very much, Mitch, for having me on. It's great to be on your show.
Absolutely. Good.
Can you hear me okay?
So, yeah, I can hear you just fine, Let's open up first with a little bit of your own background, and then we'll go into what I was saying about the way we can understand some of the things you were sharing with me recently, Norm, about the precession of the equinoxes and the way that shows up in different contexts, different societal contexts, historical and otherwise, and understand the role of astrology in that. Then we'll move into the financial forecasting, if you would. So take it from the top. Let us know, how did you get into this, and what did you do with it?
Oh, how did I get into this? I got interested in the stock market when I was 15. I was studying that, and then I went off to college. I'm a sort of a natural born people watcher. I like to watch. One of the people is of somebody who sits in an outdoor cafe and watch the people go by and all the crazy stuff they do.
Mm-hmm.
And so one day I was in a bookstore. When I was going to college, and saw an astrology book. I was skeptical. I thought it was nonsense, but I picked up the book and started reading through it. And I said, "Wow, this is kind of interesting. I'll take it back to the dorm and try it out on some of my friends." And I was amazed at how accurate they were all going. How did you do that? And that's amazing. And so then I started getting studied more and more astrology.
So in other words, at that moment, you were looking at, you could say, character types, the way the sun sign and the rising, etc., was reflective in their personality.
Absolutely. So then I thought there's got to be more to this than one book, so I got more books and studied more. And then about a year later, meanwhile, I'm also doing the stock market. And so about a year later, I ran across the book that tied the I thought, astrology is psychology, and the market is psychology. There's got to be a way to tie the two together. Then about a year later, I stumbled on a book that did that. Donald Bradley's Stock Market Prediction showed you how you could take astrological planetary positions and do quantify that and put it on a graph and do a forecast. So that got me started on doing the financial astrology.
That's interesting. And then how did you do once you began applying?
How to say that again?
How did you do yourself financially when you started to
apply? How did I do? I did quite well.
Donald Bradley's ideas.
You mean how did I do financially?
Yes.
Yeah, I did well. I started investing in the stock market while I was in college there and made enough money to, I was majoring in economics and finance, got the idea. I started trading options. Options were new back then, and I asked my prof when I was a senior if I could go research the Chicago Board Options Exchange. He said okay, so I went to Chicago and researched that, and I said, how do you become a member here? And they sent me to the chairman of the membership committee, and he said, son, you got, after answering all my questions, he said, son, you got any money? I said, well, I got a small inheritance. He said, here, put your name on this list. You can buy a membership for $25,000. They're trading in the open market at $45,000, and that sounded like a nice profit to me. So I did that and ended up going to Chicago right out of school.
Interesting.
On the floor as a market
so you were on the exchange, the Commodities exchange.
Oh, the
and
options, Chicago Board Options Exchange was stock options, and they were a child of the Chicago Board of Trade, which was at the time the world's largest, one of the largest futures exchanges in the world. They mostly did famous for doing grains and that sort of thing, agricultural.
Right, sure.
Commodities.
So how much better did you see you were doing from the fellows to your left and your right?
Say that question again.
You were using astrology for making your financial decisions, correct?
Right. Yeah.
So how much better, let's say approximately statistically, were you doing than the fellows to your right and your left?
Oh, I would say after I got over the learning curve there, how to trade and that sort of thing, then I think there was a year there where I was probably in the top 5% of the traders on the floor there. I don't know. That's hard to quantify that,
Yeah, I was just asking in general. In other words, we're trying to assess. We're trying to assess the particular value of astrology in this context. So that's why I asked that question, so we could have some kind of yardstick. If they were just throwing darts at the target or flipping coins or doing some research and you were using astrology, what's the, some sense of probabilistic difference? That's what
I couldn't give you exact numbers. I don't know what everybody else was doing. I didn't ask to see their P&L runs and so forth, how much money they're making. You kind of have a general sense. I was told that I was probably in the first, after about a year and a half or so, I was probably in the top 5 or 10% of people there on the floor. So
very
it's pretty good.
Very good. Very good. So
yeah,
let's
making. I at one point I was struggling, and because there's a learning curve there to knowing how to trade and so forth, and
absolutely.
And so my account got down to about $500, and in about 18 months I had it close to $1 million. So,
wow, I think that story says a lot in itself. You were in your early 20s, and that's a significant jump. So you answered the question. That's great. So let's take a look, and then we'll move more into the financial forecasting. That's a little bit of your background, to the point that you were said to be, by that particular magazine, Commodities magazine, a certified technical genius, and certainly we're going to want to pick your brain about this. But let's just take a moment to look at astrology from a larger point of view, and look at it from the point of view of the precession of the equinoxes. Would you walk us through what it is you were sharing with me? I was so pleased to hear of what that is, and what are its implications for us here on planet Earth.
Okay, well, first of all, the precession of equinoxes is you have to imagine that the planets are like the minute and hour hand on a clock, and the stars behind that is kind of like the face of the clock. And the difference of this clock is not only do the hands move, but the face of the clock moves, and that's the stars, the background there. And so those stars relative to the Earth are moving backwards through the zodiac at about 1 degree every 72 years. So we can move the whole face there. Right now, we're in the age of Pisces due to the way their things are aligned. It takes about 2,150 years to move through a zodiac sign on this basis. So if we go back about 4,000 years to the time of the Egyptians, we were in the age of Taurus. Taurus is said to be a fixed earth sign, so that means you have earth is material, and fixed means unmoving, unchanging. And then the opposite sign of Taurus is Scorpio, which has to do with death and afterlife and regeneration. And so if you go look at what the Egyptians were most famous for was building the pyramids. They haven't moved in 4,000 years. That's kind of fixed earth symbology. And they built those for the afterlife of the pharaohs, which is the opposite sign, Scorpio. So you have the Taurus, Scorpio reflection of that time, the age of Taurus. Then as we got toward the end of the age of Taurus, we had Moses lead the Hebrews out of Egypt. There's a whole symbology there trying to leave the age of Taurus, leave Egypt, and go toward the age of Aries. Aries is the sign of oneism, and it's the ram, and one of the major symbols of Judaism is the ram's horn, and Aries is the ram. And then Moses, the opposite sign of Aries is Libra, which is the law. So Moses went up on the mountain and came down with the law. So you have all the symbology there. Oneism, monotheism, you have the ram's horn, you have the law, Libra. Then we go about, roughly 1,500, 2,000 years later, then everything lines up to move into Pisces, because we're going backwards to the signs. And then the smaller cycles, relatively speaking, you have Jupiter and Saturn line up in Pisces right at the time the precession equinox was going into Pisces. And so the three wise men who were astrologers looking for the figure that fit that chart. So that's how we got Jesus. So the major symbology of Christianity is the fishes and the loaves. You have the Pisces is fish. The opposite sign of Pisces is Virgo, and that's the goddess of grain and wheat and so forth, and that's where you have the loaves. So it's all there. And now we're moving to modern times. Now, if you saw the show Hair, the musical Hair, they talk about the age of Aquarius. Now we're getting close to where we're going to move out of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. That's the song. This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. That's kind of like the transitional period where you're kind of right on the cusp there of the sign. And I believe that that's going to begin in about 2020 when Jupiter and Saturn line up in Aquarius, and the precession equinox is getting close to moving into the sign Aquarius.
That's very interesting. And the opposite of Aquarius is Leo?
Leo. And so, therefore, Aquarius has to do with, one of the things Aquarius has to do with is, although a lot of people think it's the water bearer, but it's not really water, it's symbolic water. If you look at it, it's a man holding a jug and stuff is coming out. That's really the life force. It's like electromagnetism. It's like electricity coming out of there.
It's like what we understand as chi. Yeah.
What's that?
It's what we understand from the ancient Chinese idea of chi, life force.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And then the opposite is Leo. So that implies that in the not-too-distant future, we'll probably have solar energy because Leo is ruled by the sun.
Surely. Or you could say lion energy. Maybe we'd have a lot of lion energy.
Mayan or lion?
Lion.
Lions. Okay.
I'm playing with you. I'm kidding.
You're being a playful lion.
Of course, because Leo the lion. So, in other words, everything is working backwards from the precession point of view, and always accommodating and relating to its opposite, such as you said. You've got in this last case of the Aquarius, Leo. Before that, it was Pisces, Virgo, and Taurus, Scorpio. Right, yep. Exactly. So very, very interesting. And so you say that what we've been talking about as the age of Aquarius will be beginning from your estimation 2020.
That's when the dawning begins, sort of the transitional period. And Aquarius is big on scientific things, humanitarian things, and technology, computers,
surely,
electronics.
So what would you say you would anticipate then, Norm, about the changes you would anticipate or forecast in our society, contradistinct from what it is like now?
I think we're going to accelerate the whole technology thing even more, and we'll probably get, like I said, solar energy, and I'm not a visionary. I just try to report what I see. That's it. So
well,
I think,
what is it that I'm trying to find out from you?
Might get a new
based on your
religion.
knowledge of astrology, what it is you would see. Because right now, you could say there's a huge issue around humanitarian values. I mean, they're there, but they are sinking in most respects across the planet like a rock. So based on what you're saying, we're maybe moving toward a more humanitarian-based society, which right now it's more talk than action, and maybe then there would be either equal talk and action or more action than talk. I don't know.
Okay.
Is that a fair kind of supposition to make?
I would go along with that, yeah.
Okay.
But it's hard to say what form it's going to take. I would think it might be a bit of a paradox in that, maybe I would probably go with maybe we move more toward a free market capitalistic type society, where people have equal opportunity, but you have to make it. It's not welfare, not socialism. More individualism,
More individualism.
Yeah.
Okay. More than, let's say, at the beginning of the United States being founded? More than the time of Adam Smith?
Well, that's a whole different thing. We had an agrarian society then. It's we're not even in that universe anymore. But compared to now, we have a rather socialistic thing going here with the United States and the rest of the world. I think they could get a couple of these countries going bankrupt, though. I think people start moving away from that.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. So would we expect to see more of the characteristics of Aquarius or of Leo? Or would both
I think the Aquarius
be
will be dominant, but it will pull from its reflection is the opposite Leo, so it will pull something somewhat from that.
Understood.
Yeah.
You know, people have been
But I think it'll
waiting.
kind of undermine. I think it'll undermine the Pisces thing, which is very ideological and so forth. And so I think you might get a shift in terms of a new world religion based more on science and technology and less on mythology and that sort of thing. You know.
Interesting, and that might even apply to the body politic, where it would become less ideological and perhaps sort of more practical and maybe even effective.
Right. Would
that be a fair
pragmatic
supposition? More pragmatic, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Well, I can't wait for 2020, but I will.
Okay.
All right. So that's interesting. So the other comment I could make here regarding all that you laid out, which is so interesting about looking at the movement from the age of Taurus forward through the astrological precessional lens, if you will, suggests that the ancient texts, such as the Old Testament, telling the story, the 5 books of Moses, can be understood essentially as an astrological zodiacal text.
I think there's definitely some allegory there, some symbolism. And, you know, if you want to really get into the weeds there's astrology all through the Bible and the Torah and so forth. You know, they talked about Solomon's temple, the 4 gates of the temple relate to the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac. You have Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. If you go read that with an astrological point of view, you'll see it relates nicely. They take that same context, that same template, and use it in the New Testament. I think for the it's the 4 apostles. Is that right? 4 apostles. You have the Luke, Mark, and who's the other one?
John.
2. Yeah, those personalities relate to. Those are personalities I think relate to the 4 fixed signs. If you let's talk about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons, and that's where we got the 12 tribes. And if you read their personalities and go back to that time, now we're back to the time of the Egyptians again. When Joseph went to Egypt, that was the time that was in the age of Taurus. Back then, the first sign of the zodiac was considered to be Taurus. So if you count from Taurus and you read the description of the personalities of the 12 signs, and then you count around to the 11th sign, which was Joseph, you'll land on Pisces. And he was the Pisces is the dream sign, and Joseph made his reputation as a dream interpreter for the Pharaoh.
Indeed.
So it all fits.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yes. So
the first son, they described the first son, Reuben, as a materialistic, greedy kind of guy, and that's Taurus is a materialistic sign, and he was the first son, so that corresponds to Taurus. So it all fits.
Well, be careful with the way you say that, Norm, because I am Taurus sun sign, and because we may be materialistic, which I'm not, doesn't mean we're greedy, which I'm not. So, we have to be very careful about generalizations.
I think greed is good.
You do, yeah, right. Well, you and Michael Douglas, well, I would beg to differ, but we're not going to open up that one right now.
Okay.
But what other symbolism would one want to be looking out for when it comes to understanding the ancient scripture or mythology, for that matter? It's very interesting about the 12 tribes.
The story of Daniel. He wrestling the lion, right? And he's described as a Scorpio wrestling the lion. So you have a Leo. Scorpio-Leo wrestling match,
Oh yeah, okay. Now, how is that? I don't get that.
Well, I think he was described as a Scorpio, and he had to fight the lion. I think they put him in a cage with a lion or something like that, right? And that's a Leo. So there's some symbolism there.
what exactly? So, but you know what it really looks like? It wasn't like the symbolism of the four gates of Solomon, for instance, was added to the text, but maybe was actually the basis of the text to help us understand through story the story of the universe or cosmology, which is the precession of the equinoxes.
That could be. And the 12 tribes, the 12 tribes correspond
and the 12 tribes, exactly.
to the 12 signs of the zodiac.
Exactly.
There's a reason that there's 12 people on a jury. That's all based on the original idea of a jury with 12 people was that you would have a diverse, at least have each sign a diverse a group of people's opinions, representing the 12 signs of the zodiac.
Yes.
Yeah. Here, I'll tell you a little American story. I'll tell you a little American history story. So I briefly mentioned that when Jesus was born, the astrologers, the wise men,
the three wise men,
for somebody because Jupiter and Saturn lined up in Pisces. Well, that's part of a cycle within a cycle thing, the Jupiter-Saturn thing. There's a cycle that occurs. Jupiter-Saturn lines up every 19 and a half years. It stays in this. There's 12. There's 12 signs. Each sign is the signs are divided into four elements: fire, earth, air, and water. And so that cycle continues in the same element. It'll hop to another sign of the same element and continue doing that for 240 to 270 years. Then that's the smaller one, the 19 and a half year cycle, is the mutation cycle. Then the next one up is called the grand mutation, when you stay in the same element and do that for about 240 to 270 years. And then there's the great mutation cycle, which lasts about 960 years. Okay? And so every 240 to 270 years, that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction shifts into a different element. You start a new cycle. So here's an American history story. So in 1840, Jupiter and Saturn lined up, and they changed element and got into Earth. They had been in fire, and they shifted to Earth. William Henry Harrison was elected president. He decided that would it be a swell thing to walk to his inauguration on a cold and rainy day in Washington D.C. and he got pneumonia, and he was dead in 40 days. He's the shortest presidential president we've ever had.
Yeah.
So from that point on, you might know that every 20 years, roughly, with Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, whoever was president during that period of time died in office up until Reagan.
Oh,
right?
Really? Died?
Yeah, it's called the Tecumseh's curse. The reason it's called Tecumseh's curse is because before Harrison was president, he was a general and fought the Battle of Tippecanoe against the Indians, against the chief Tecumseh at the Battle of Tippecanoe in Indiana. It's good near where I grew up. I know about the Battle of Tippecanoe. It's not too far from where I grew up. And so what happened was they had the two brothers running the tribe there. And one was sort of the military leader, and the other was sort of the spiritual leader. The military leader was Tecumseh. He was off at an big Indian conference somewhere, and told his brother, "Don't do anything." They knew that the Americans were nearby, and don't provoke them. So apparently the brother didn't listen to him and provoked Harrison to attack, and it kind of had a wipeout there of the Indians. So obviously Tecumseh was, to say the least, had a big grudge against Harrison, and supposedly they put a curse on him. Oh, by the way, Tecumseh and his brother, called the Prophet, the way they got to power was when they were taken as prisoners when they were kids. There was a battle, and I don't know if they were taken from their tribe or something, and so they grew up around with white missionaries, and they learned how to read English and so forth. And so one day they were looking through some of the books that the missionaries had, and they had an almanac, and they learned about eclipses. And so they got the idea someday they'll go back to their tribe, and they could be able to forecast when there was going to be an eclipse. So that's what they did. They went back to their tribe, and they said, at midday today, the sun will disappear from the sky. And now the Indians are like scared of these guys, that they have some kind of magical powers, and that's how they got the power.
That's how the white man got the power.
That's how the Tecumseh and his brother, the Prophet, came to power.
They themselves.
Okay. Yeah, because they knew they could.
They had that
using
information.
the almanac. They using the almanac, they could predict when the eclipse was going to occur.
Yes, exactly. So they seemed all powerful to the others. Very
so Eddie, fast forwarding now, we have the Battle of Tippecanoe. That's how we got the campaign slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. That was a nickname for William Henry Harrison. And so then supposedly, legend has it, that Chief Tecumseh put a curse on Harrison in the United States that, supposedly every 20 years or something, that a president would die in office or something like that. You can look it up in Wikipedia. But what I believe was really happening is when Harrison died in office, he set a precedent. He set a cycle in motion there, and so therefore, maybe if he didn't walk to his inauguration to get sick and die, we might not have that happen. But he did that. I think there's an interplay there between cycles and people and events, and the events can set the cycle, and the cycles can set the events.
Yes.
This is my belief.
Very interesting.
This is my theory. So anyway, so we had.
So the astrological configuration set the context for another cycle, a human cycle, to kick in based on his or her behavior, which led to certain outcomes, i.e., death, and then that set a precedent, no pun intended, for presidential death in office up to a certain point.
Yep. So you had Lincoln assassinated. You had Hayes. Was he assassinated or died in office? So you had McKinley definitely assassinated. Then after that we had Harding died in office.
Roosevelt.
And then Roosevelt died in office.
Roosevelt.
No, Franklin died.
Did he? No, I don't think Roosevelt died in office. Did he?
Yes, he did. 1945 in Georgia. He went for vacation. April of 45. FDR died in office. Absolutely.
Yeah, FDR. No, I'm talking about Teddy.
Teddy did not die in office.
He did not die in office. So that interrupted
No, I didn't say
cycle.
Teddy Roosevelt. I said after McKinley, it was Harding, and then after Harding, it was FDR. Kennedy.
Okay. So in other words, it wasn't each consecutive president, but it was a cycle.
I said every 20 years.
Every 20 years. I'm sorry.
Which corresponds to Jupiter-Saturn conjunction.
I see. Got it. Very interesting. Very interesting. So I just want to harken back for a moment, and then we'll go into some of the use of what you're saying for financial purposes, which is, I know,
all right, well, let me just finish the story if I could, Mitch.
I think you're going to like that. Yeah, please.
So anyway, we kept that cycle going. Always Jupiter, Saturn, conjunct in Earth signs. All the presidents died who were elected with that until we got to 1980 with Ronald Reagan. Okay, now a strange thing happened. It only happens about once every 960 years or so. That's where the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction flips out of that element, temporarily jumps into another element, and then comes back again. So when Reagan was elected, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction occurred in an air sign, Libra, not in an Earth sign, and that was like a fluke. So the next time when Bush was elected, it was back in Earth, but the cycle then had been broken because Reagan survived the assassination attempt. Okay.
Interesting. Yes.
And I predicted.
And you're suggesting that he dodged that bullet, so to speak. At least that he did not die. I mean, because it wasn't in Earth, but it was in air.
That's it.
And then it went back to Earth.
One more time. Now we're going to go to air sign permanently. Well, not permanently, as permanent as it gets, for about 240 to 270 years, with Jupiter and Saturn line up in about 2020 in Aquarius. So we'll start a whole new cycle.
I understand. Very interesting. Very interesting. These stories are fabulous. I mean, it really helps to understand history from an entirely different point of view, of course, which is one with which you are familiar, and myself and my audience is becoming. So what else would you like to illuminate from this point of view?
I don't know. Maybe we should talk about the markets. You might have noticed that the markets have been moving rather energetically.
First of all, let's let everybody know that you are listening to A Better World Radio with Mitchell J. Rabin. We are on every Wednesday at 6 p.m. here on Blog Talk Radio. And if you do not yet get our free newsletter, it's available at www.abetterworld.tv, abetterworld.tv. We also announce in our newsletters who will be our guest on our weekly television show, aired here in the Big Apple in Manhattan every Monday at 7 p.m. So certainly tune in. You can also watch the show from the same website. So become part of a Better World community. We so appreciate your attention to our shows, both television and radio, and do what we can to bring really interesting, really valuable and substantive material to the foreground. Today's guest is Norm Winski, who is an astrologer and financial forecaster who's done very well for himself and his students and clients over the course of many decades. And he's got the track record to prove it, and he's got the Astro-Trend Newsletter, which comes out and in rather specific detail lays out what options, again, no pun intended, may be available to those who want to follow this kind of guidance. So, Norm Winski, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you utilize your astrological understanding for forecasting what's happening in the markets?
Okay, well, for example, the stock market is the big basket of everything. There's a little bit of everything in the stock market, and it usually generally reflects the general mass psychology of the people. So, you might have noticed that if you follow financial news at all, one day a news item will come out on a Tuesday, for example, and the market will go up. Then they'll rehash the same story 2 days later, and the market will go down on this. Oh, the market went up because of that, and then 2 days later, the market went down for the same reason. So it's all about how people feel on a particular day.
Yes, indeed, and their interpretation of the information.
How the planets are configured out there, whether they're in positive configurations or negative configurations, can correlate or possibly influence how people feel on any one given day, and in the stock market it manifests as a barometer of mass psychology.
Well, there's there are probably several other variables, but for instance, Virgo as the goddess of grain. If you look at the commodities markets and Virgo is well positioned on a given day, prominently, let's say, that might be an indicator, would it be, for what would be the better disposition of grain sales?
Well, that would be, I'd be looking at the grain market and seeing if there's a possible trading opportunity there. We had, if you read, I know you got my letter there, Mitch, and I emphasize on the markets. I emphasized in my letter was looked interesting the first week of January, toward the end of the first week of January, for soybeans. There was a strong theme there I saw in the planets and the astrological signatures, and we had a new moon on the weekend. And the new moon often corresponds to turns in the grain market. It's probably one of the easier markets to trade are the grains because they tend to be lunar sensitive. They tend to make highs and lows with the full moon and new moon. Because the grains were scraping bottom, they were very depressed. I thought that there was a good chance that we would make a low there. And despite the big down we've had in the stock market and crude oil and some other markets, soybeans have actually been moving up here the last couple of days. And
is that in accordance with your understanding of what would happen?
Right. Well, I was thinking that we would have a low late last week, and now we're moving up. The grains have been staying firm here and moving higher as of the new moon on Saturday.
Yes, but is that what you forecast?
Yeah, it's in the letter, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a lot. It's a 40-page letter, so it's in great depth. So, so you said it would be at the bottom, but with the advent of the new moon, it would start to move up.
Right.
And in fact,
I thought we'd be making a low there, and then get a change in trend, which means you should start moving higher.
It would start to move up. Got it. So have the people who have been following your advice, tell me a little bit about what kind of results they've seen over the course
I have no idea what their results are. If they renew their subscription, they're happy campers. Every now and then they get a great email where, oh, you're doing a great job, da-da-da. So I don't ask to see their brokerage statements or ask them how much they're doing. I did have one guy, this is purely, I don't know, hearsay, whatever he told me. I have no proof to this. I had a relatively new client 6 months ago or so, and after about 3 or 4 months of getting my letter, and I have a course too, he's taken the course, told me that he took his $10,000 account and ran it into $150,000 in a relatively short amount of time. So that's just, what he told me. Whether it's true or not, I have no idea.
Interesting. Well, you would know something about your own account. Are you following to this day your own advice?
Right now, I'm taking a trading sabbatical. I haven't been trading lately.
Okay.
I traded for about 35 years, made a living off of this for almost every day for about 35 years or so, and so I know this stuff works. I show the results of my letter every month, and show you the forecast from the last month, show you the charts, and say, here, I had this date as the forecast to turn, and you can go look at the chart and see whether it worked or not. I add up the numbers there and show you what the batting average is.
Okay, so in other words, in retrospect, you can show the accuracy of your work.
Oh, sure. Now, what people do is
how does that look?
Everybody trades a different way, so I can't say, in terms of, people are making this kind of return or making this kind of money, because everybody trades it a different way. This is research.
Oh, absolutely.
Research.
I understand that. I'm not talking about trading styles.
But my metric is I show them the batting average. Here, I have these forecasted dates for turns in the market, and here's the chart, here's the results, and we can go from there,
Exactly.
I just compiled the numbers for last year. I think for the stock market, I had somewhere, I don't have the number in front of me, I think it was about 72% winners on the dates for the stock market.
That's exceptional. How do you account? Just I don't want this to sound too academic, but in some way, your information source is so sound because you're dealing with the physical attributes of movement of planets, and what would then account for you're not getting closer to 80 or 90%? Is it your interpretation of the information?
Well, because we don't know anything. In the world of investing, in Wall Street, if you're over 60% accurate in forecasting what the market's going to do, you're considered near genius. If you're over 70%, they're probably a genius.
Yes.
Listen, professional baseball players, the greatest baseball players of all time, batted .400. That means 40%.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
It's all relative to the profession you're in. Nobody's in the markets is expected to do much more than, if you're in the 60s, if you can get 2 out of 3, that's considered very good.
Very true. Very true. So 71 or 72 would be quite a batting average, no question about it.
Now, the greatest traders I've ever seen when I was on the floor, for example, people would get hot, and maybe for a little while they would be right 90% of the time.
Right. So let me ask you. So let me ask you, as you look through your lens, when you look at the financial markets altogether, because obviously there's a tremendous amount of trouble in the currency markets, in all the markets. Look, the Chinese stock exchange has closed, at least temporarily. They are riddled with issues, and that has reverberations throughout the entire rest of the globe. Based on this, what kind of forecast are you seeing for markets in general across the planet?
Okay. Well, I'm going to give you my really big possible scenario here. I want you to consider And we had an internet bubble back in 2000. Then they decided to trade the internet bubble after that imploded for a real estate and mortgage bubble. Then that bubble imploded. And then we traded that for a government debt bubble. Okay?
Yes.
There's nothing left. The government is the last line of defense. If this government debt bubble implodes, there's nowhere to go.
Exactly.
There's a principle in charting the markets that you get 3 drives to a top or 3 drives to a bottom. Well, we're now in the third bubble of a major sort of a mega bubble, and I don't know what happens if we implode here. I could normally I'd say, we don't care whether markets go up or down. We can make money either way. But in this case, you can maybe make a fortune. If you saw the movie The Big Short, how people
I was just about to bring that up. Yes. Uh-huh.
People can make fortunes going short, but the problem is if the whole system collapses and you call up your broker and say, okay, send me my fortune, and they go, well, sorry, we don't have it.
Right, exactly.
So
this is important. So what you're saying is that based on what you see on your many decades of experience and your access to the astrological information, this
is not really based so much on astrology as historical patterns. We could be at the juncture now of a 500-year. We could be at the juncture here of a 500-year civilization cycle. There was a professor called Dr. Rabin who did amazing research, spent his entire life chronicling weather cycles, civilization cycles, and came up with that there's a 510-year civilization cycle where we flip polarity from Eastern civilization to Western civilization and back again about every 510 years. Well, if you go back about 510 years from now, you're back at the time of about Columbus and when the Renaissance began and Western civilization woke up out of the Dark Ages and we started ascending as the Eastern civilizations, which had been in their golden age before that, they started going down. And so now the Eastern civilization seem to be rising up again, and so that we could be at a major shift here. So there's a lot of things happening.
Is that what you suspect?
I think longer term that's what's probably going to happen. I think you're going to see a more dominant Eastern civilization dominating the world here but it's going to be gradual. It's not going to happen overnight. But you had China came out of its shell there in the last 20, 30 years, and I think that it's not going to be a smooth ride. It's going to be, as Betty Davis said in the movie, it's got to fasten your seatbelt. It's going to be a bumpy ride. So China's being run by. I mean, think of the paradox. It's really kind of funny. You got communists trying to run a capitalistic economy there. They don't know what they're doing, and so they're going to. You see them now. It's like amateurs trying to run a free markets, and they don't know what they're doing, and so they're going to stumble.
Listen, Alan Greenspan didn't. Norm, let's get real. Let's get real. No, Alan Greenspan didn't know what he was doing either. So it's not this idea of communists running that's just a bunch of propaganda.
Well, the Fed has a bad track record.
Nobody knows what they're doing. The Federal Reserve Bank doesn't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing.
I can jump in, Mitch. The Fed has a bad track record from the day they open their doors as to how they manage the economy. They always tend to do the wrong thing at the wrong time. In 1929, they were cutting the money supply as the economy was going into a depression.
Yes, exactly. The whole idea of austerity is bizarre in situations like this, yet it keeps being called upon. So, no, I appreciate your point. So what I'm saying simply is that nobody's an expert in how these things work, and having some insight like you're bringing forward helps us to navigate somehow in the dark. Now, I want to just bring in the wonderful dear friend of mine, David Kazmaier, who introduced the two of us, who has called in and wants to pose a question. So let me bring him in. Typically, I don't do this. I like to stay on point with my guests, but David is an exception, and I want to bring him on for asking you or me the question. David Katzmeyer, welcome to A Better World.
Thank you, Mitchell. Are we connected?
We are. Please ask your question.
Oh, yes, sir. Oh, my question. If I may, I'd like to give a very brief comment on point with a couple of things mentioned so far, and then ask a specific question regarding the economy to your guest, Norm Winski. May I do that?
Go right ahead, please.
Okay. First of all, thank you for having Norm Winski on. I think he's a brilliant astrologer. I was already familiar with his work. I have read the Astro-Trend Newsletter, and I have been amazed, and nothing's changed my mind in these last few years since I first found the works of Norm Winski. So I wish to support your choice of guests tonight. Now, Norm, you mentioned Chief Tecumseh and the curse against the presidents when he was a Shawnee Indian up in the higher region, and he formed a confederacy of Indian nations, traveled all the way up and down the Mississippi region, trying to unite even more tribes in a giant confederacy against the European expansion. He failed to unite everybody. He had some tragedies in all of these attempts, and then there was the curse. Regarding the curse beginning in 1840, the curse was also nicknamed the zero factor. Every 20 years, from 1840, 1860, 1880, 1900, and so on, the president who was elected in that year would never survive to the end of his presidency, regardless of how many terms he was reelected and what term it happened. Like it can be very short. In 1900, McKinley entered office in January of 1901 and was shot very soon thereafter by an anarchist. And that's when Vice President Teddy Roosevelt took over. Harding in 20. But Roosevelt was elected in 1940, and it was in his second term that he died in office from ailments. Of course, we lost President Kennedy. And it makes you wonder,
FDR died in his third term.
Oh, excuse me. Yes, you're absolutely right. He was elected in 1832.
No, FDR.
And then reelected in 1840. So he was the president elected in 1940. 1940 and died in 1945. Okay. His first term began in 1932, excuse me. And yes. Then it makes you wonder, did the curse just go away, or is it fading away? Because in 1980, when President Reagan was elected, he did not die in office, which was consistent with the cyclical pattern, but he did take a bullet in the chest. Then, in the year 2000, George Bush 41 was elected in 2000. He did not die in office, but the attacks of 9/11, supposedly the plane that came down Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and into the Pentagon, and the planes that went into the World Trade Center were not all of the planes. It was reportedly part of a massive attack that was planned, as maybe as many as 16 planes. But when all the planes were grounded, and reportedly, I can't confirm this, but that other plots were foiled in the process when all the planes across the nation were grounded, and one of the planes was targeting the White House and/or Capitol building. So was this an assassination attempt against the president as well? So it goes very interesting that every president elected every 20 years on a year ending in zero, never lived to the end of their presidency, regardless of how many terms they served. But then the pattern gets broken in 1980. President Reagan takes a bullet, doesn't die, and reportedly there's assassination attempts that included the President Bush as one of the targets. But
I think you may have missed that part of the show, because Norm did explain what happened during the Reagan presidency with a different 960-year cycle, which changed the element from earth to air. And that's what accounts for the fact that even though he was shot, he wasn't killed.
That would provide a grounding answer for something that seemed inexplicably a pattern for so long. Now, one final very brief response, and then my question. Norm, you mentioned that there seems to be a power shift from east to west. History does record it as such. the Foundation for the Study of Cycles has reported on what they believe to be a 500-year cycle in the power shifts between the East and the West. And the Orient certainly has been the pinnacle of civilization at different times of history, going all the way, back into the 1600s, back to the Great Wall, and on and on. Well, according to that 500-year pattern, as reported by the Foundation for the Study of Cycles and my own theory of cycles, there is a rising trend that will absolutely call for the Orient to be a power again, and this includes India in my estimation. But enough of what you said so far. I've been long-winded. I want to ask a question since we're now hardcore in the economy, and I've been very impressed with your work there. Norm, there is something that really befuddles economists, and it's called inversions. And it goes like this. They might be following hardcore data, and they might be following cycles analysis. What will happen is sometimes they get what's called an inversion, and an inversion goes like this. They say, at such and such a time, our data suggests that the market is going to move up or it's going to move down starting at this time, and it's going to move so much, last so long, and then come back to whatever this trend line is. All right? Very simple. It sounds a little vague, but here's the thing. Here's what the inversion is. Sometimes what happens, the prediction falls dead on. It does happen when they call for it. It does move about as much as they expected. This change lasts for about as long as they expected it to. But get this. It moves in exactly the opposite direction that they called it to do. If they said it was going to go up for 2 weeks and go up by 15%, it goes down. And so what befuddles them in the inversions is they hit the time, they hit the amount, and they get the direction entirely wrong, and they never know when an inversion is going to come. They seem to not be very often. And so I was wondering if there is anything in astrology, planetary movement, that could explain this phenomenon that befuddles the economists. What is causing an inversion?
Okay, that's a question for me?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay. Well, I've made a major advancement that I'm able to, with a high degree of high percentage batting average, to forecast when these inversions are likely to occur.
Whoa.
So it's based on the planets. When the planets do a certain particular phenomena called a station point, due to the relative motion of the Earth, the planets, if you go out and plot the planets, it appears that the planets individually look like occasionally they stop their motion and reverse their direction. This is due to the relative motion of the Earth. Just like if you're driving on the highway and you're doing 60 and somebody passes you doing 70, if you glance out your side window, you might get the impression that you're going backwards when you know you're going forward. So that's what's happened with the planets. They have the appearance relative to the Earth that they stop their motion and reverse direction. When that happens, that has the power potentially to invert the energy. So
you mean retrograde?
So it appears as it's described as a retrograde.
No, that's when you have a retrograde or direct. There's two kinds of station points. One where it stops to turn and go backwards, that's called retrograde, and one when it stops to go forwards, that's called direct.
Of course.
Oh my God. This answers a fundamental question. I mean, I've heard some leading economists really scratching their heads over this. And so let me get this straight. There's the word parallax. Parallax is the apparent movement of a body in motion when viewed from another body in motion. In other words, when you're looking on the Earth and you're following the other planets, what does it look like when you look up in the sky? And because sometimes we'll pass a planet, or a planet is on, closer to the sun or further to the sun, and our relation to each other, sometimes they look like they're going across the sky every night, and then they'll stop, and they'll go backwards, because they might be one of the outer planets, and we're inside of that, spinning around faster anyway. So this retrograde motion, so they might have been noticing the patterns in the market as influenced by these planetary motions, but what they don't account for is when one of us passes on the highway, as it were, a circular highway, and the retrograde begins, and it That's it. Retrograde.
Okay.
Well, the station point is what seems to do it. So the planet can stop its motion. If you go out in the night sky and plot these planets, you would get the impression that the planets stop their motion and then reverse the direction. Just like when you throw a ball up in the air, there's that moment where the ball seems to be suspended in the air before it comes back down. So the planets stop their motion and reverse their direction. And Mercury does that 3 or 4 times a year. For example, Mercury just turned retrograde last week. Jupiter turned retrograde, I think Thursday night, and so that's and when that happens, sometimes the energy gets inverted. We can go from turn positive energy into negative energy, or vice versa.
Right.
This is huge.
All right,
you have
David
answered
Katzmeier,
a huge question.
Thank you very much
Mitch,
for your good question.
Mitch, how much more time do we have?
Yes. Okay. I just want to come around to just a couple of more minutes here. I wanted just to wrap a particular piece of this up because related to something you were talking about, the bubbles, 3 bubbles, implosion. You made reference to The Big Short. I, too, saw it just recently. I'm asserting, without astrological information, that bubble isn't over, even though it popped in 2007 and 8. It has been underground, fed by the Federal Reserve Bank to the tune of many trillions of dollars, propping up banks, for being at the roulette table, and now so much money has made these major 5 major banks, more powerful and richer than they were back then, and now we are heading toward, you referred to it as a possible government implosion. That's the last vestige. What does Earth look like after? What is it that you see, and when is it that you see it, relative to all that you've said in your studying of these trends and cycles?
Well, I can't give you specifics. So if we have a major financial collapse, I can't tell you what that's going to look like, other than all those banks you talked about. They may not be around anymore. But I just want people to be aware of many of the assumptions that people have. You got to rethink them. That we could be at the end of a David said there, we might be at the end of a 500-year cycle here. And I see a pattern here that you learn certain principles from studying the markets, which sort of relate to physics. And that is that one of the major patterns you see in chart reading is that you often will get 3 drives to a high or 3 drives to a low. Well, we had the internet bubble in 2000. We had the real estate mortgage bubble in 2007, the peak. And now we have a possible government debt bubble, and so that's like 3 drives to a top. It's like we have like a mega bubble forming here with these 3 smaller bubbles creating that.
Yes, exactly.
So I think there's a good chance we may have seen the high back in May. I forecasted that to the day, May 19th, May 20th, as we had a lineup there of a Mercury turning retrograde and a new moon within one day. And when I went and researched that back, I found out that doesn't occur very often. But previous day that it occurred was October the 11th, 2007, which was the high day in 2000, which led to the big collapse.
Yes, indeed. So in short,
while you was an important day. What's that?
While you can't give specifics, what you do foresee is a 3rd bubble imploding. That's important in itself.
I think it's a possibility. I think you have to consider that. How we're going to do, what is going to happen? How's that going to be, managed? Is there anything that the government or the central Fed can do to alleviate that? I don't know. It depends upon who's running things then.
Yes, exactly. Well, as you said earlier, Norm, if the Fed misread the 1929 crash and stopped producing more money and, injecting it in, but the opposite at a critical moment like that, what's to say that they know what to do now?
There is no guarantee there, and there's another human factor that goes into that formula, the money supply formula, that all the experts would tell you one of the major factors of the crash of 29 and leading to the Depression was they didn't really understand how this stuff works, And so we now know, though, a major factor, you can go Google this, go look at monetary velocity. What is monetary velocity? How fast the money turns over. The chart for velocity has been declining. So that's why we have deflation. So you can't keep people from putting the money under their mattress or hanging on to their money. If they hang on to the money, then you tend to get a deflation, a recessionary, even depressionary type environment. You can't control that. Mm-hmm. You can print all the money you want, but if the people won't let go of the money, then the economy is not going to grow.
Exactly. In other words, if it's not in circulation, that leads to stagnation and death, as it does with the life force in the human body. So it's really an analogy of same. So I get it. It's very
Mitch, am I going to have time to share with my contact information with your folks?
Oh, by all means. We're going to have to just have you back on, Norm, because I feel that we're inching toward a very important subject that I want to, really enter your technical genius when it comes to the future of money. But for now, please give your contact information so people can get in touch with you.
Okay, you can reach me, Norm Winski, Winski. I'm in Florida at 239-594-3939. That was 239-594-3939. You can email me at nwinski@embark, as embarkmail.com. Or if you're overseas, you can call me on Skype. My Skype address is norm.winski. Or if you forget that, I'm the only Norm Winski in all of Skypedom. So looking forward to helping some of your folks there with their investing and trading and so forth. And I cover about 30 different markets and try to give precise timing for these markets and looking for some good trading opportunities.
Norm Winski, thank you very much for being a guest on today's show. We'll have you back another time to look at the economy in general as well as some of the specifics, how people can benefit personally, but how maybe we can understand the mechanisms of the game more thoroughly. Thanks again for being on today, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much for having me on, Mitch, and hi, David Katzmar. Nice to get to talk to you.
Happy New Year to you.
Take care. Thanks. Bye.
Sure. Bye-bye now. Very interesting. I hope you found that as fascinating as I did. It is very rich material. And the more you bear down with this kind of information, the more you can be well guided by being well informed. As they say, knowledge is power. And there are many ways in which that really does show up in our lives. Yeah, very interesting. If you haven't seen The Big Short, I definitely recommend it. And if you haven't seen Inside Job, which won the Academy Award for Best Documentary, was that around 2010, I believe, you should certainly make a point of seeing that as well. Both are telling the inside story of the 2007-2008 bubble, the crash. One focuses more on the market at large, Inside Job, and government involvement, etc., SEC, and The Big Short focuses more on the mortgage crisis itself and what precipitated that, and who knew what, when, and why. And it's really revealing. And my view is really that the bubble, yes, it burst, and then the banks got propped up again through the Federal Reserve producing its cash out of thin air as usual and putting it into the wrong places, which of course were the major banks at zero interest, and a lot of people got very rich on our tax dollars. To this day, billions and in fact trillions of dollars have been spread out among that, top 1 to 5 or 6%, and no one is telling that story. but how we have literally injected this money into private pockets. And it's just one of the most horrendous stories, and nobody wants to tell it because it's too heartbreaking. It's the fact that, during the G.W. Bush administration, when a pallet with $100 bills equaling $1 billion showed up in Iraq for a little payola, yes, the United States government and payola, and it disappeared. There's no trace or track of $1 billion of our hard-earned money being paid in taxes going up in smoke, as so much of our tax dollars do, literally, in so many ways. Anyway, these are the kinds of things that I feel that we Americans and all people really need to know about, because we're dealing with elements of human nature that need to be transformed. Otherwise, we're going to just keep getting more of the same old, a repeat on a horizontal level of change that's superficial, but not meaningful, not depth, not with, let's call it, verticality. And that's what we need if we want to create a better world. So while it's very interesting and valuable and fun to be able to prosper from the various markets that are out there, and one of the things I did not get to ask Norm this time around, but will in a subsequent interview, is about the role of precious metals, gold and silver in particular, and what he sees or foresees their role in the upcoming economy. I'd want to ask that also about seeds and what their role is in upcoming currencies. You betcha. Sure, because you can't eat gold and silver, no matter how delicious they may look, but you sure can eat the results of seeds, and it could be that our economy is so tanking, and the world economy so tanking. Look at China right now, for instance, and the status of its stock market and the reverberations it's having on markets across the world. We see that the U.S. dollar and other currencies are really taking a nosedive. The Russian economy as well. So what is this a reflection of? I suggest it's a reflection of our state of mind. And in different ways, Norman was saying something very similar. The astrological perspective is showing how people's emotions and feelings, and that is interpretation of data as it's influenced by astrological information and patterns, is changing the rising and the falling of stocks, commodities, futures, etc. So it's a very interesting relationship between the stars and life on planet Earth. As they say, we're just made of stardust anyway that's fallen through the earth, and even the dust in our windowsills is really cosmic in nature. That shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone who listens to this show, and it's astronomically attested. It's actually not my opinion at all. Anyway, listen, I want to just thank you all for tuning in. You know, we're at this profoundly precipitous time in our human history, and if we are going to emerge as the butterfly, well, that is going to be utterly beautiful. But other indicators show us heading toward a sixth extinction. Yes, folks, we have had 5 to date, and all indicators show that we're heading precariously toward the sixth. And we have such things as hope and faith and intention and goodwill acts, and many of them, communities gathering together to do the right thing, shift the energy, as it were, and provide food and shelter using such things as solar, etc., for energy instead of fossil fuels. We're heading in the right direction. Less methane being produced by beef, by cattle, I should say. is something that is still in the works, but more people are getting the message, or they are raising cattle on grass and going back to the way things were before we've become chemicalized and we brought military thinking into every aspect of our lives, of wars on drugs and wars on poverty, and it's wars on us is really what's going on here. And there's a war on money and economies right now. They may not say it that way, but that's clearly what's showing up. Anyway, I want to just say we're still operating our society on money, and that's a good thing in many ways. And as I said, precipitous in others. And we've got to kind of put on our seatbelts, as Norm was quoting Betty Davis. I don't know that film, but I've used that phrase myself many times, and see what will be next. But I hope this show was interesting to you, and certainly take the link from abetterworld.tv, where you can also sign up for our free newsletter and share it with your family and your friends so more people can have the benefit of today's show and others. I want to also thank David Katzmeyer, my dear friend and colleague, for introducing me to Norm Winski and recommending that I interview him, and I'm very glad that I did, and I've become apprised of his really, really rich body of work, no pun intended, but he's done very well based on his astrological forecasting in financial markets. Please remember that A Better World has recently become a Better World Foundation, and we are a nonprofit corporation, a 501c3, and we are able to sustain based on your generous contributions. And those generous contributions are per your pocketbook. And we understand that. So for some people that's 100, for some people it's 10, for others it's 1,000, others it's 10,000. And that is not what we're counting, but we are appreciating any contribution which we feel is actually an investment in a better world, and it's so appreciated because it is what keeps us going. And we want to stay on the air, and we want to expand our presence on the air. So with that, I want to just thank you again for coming and sharing and being part of the A Better World community. And with that, I want to bring on one of our favorite composers, and that is no one other than Mozart. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.